Hey, g'day, it's Matt Legg. This is the Phyba Performance Podcast, and I'm here today with my good mate Ken Ware.
Hello everybody, and thank you Matt for having me on the show.
You.
And welcome to the NeuroPhysics Therapy Institute-Clinic.
Yeah, Ken is my miracle mate. Manages to get a lot of people out of wheelchairs and walking again, or maybe even doing marathons, triathlons, that sort of thing. Also works with a lot of elite athletes, works with a lot of athletes that have been through extreme sports, extreme athletes, like a lot of fighters, big wave surfers, combat sports, but then also working with a lot of endurance athletes and other athletes to achieve amazing performance. I'm not an athlete, surprisingly, but a lot of the stuff that Ken has actually taught me, I take back into my own world, where it makes me work better, makes me more efficient, makes me a better, husband, father, boss, and all that sort of stuff. Just a lot of those things that help everyday life. So check out everything Ken does. Like, just after this podcast, just go through YouTube, go through every bit of stuff and watch all of his videos, and you'll actually learn so bloody much. Today, what I want to talk about is, I want Ken to kind of explain a little bit about his theories around stress, angst, aggression. I want to talk about things like stretching, cramping, muscle tension, and everything like that, and in regards to performance in particular, whether you're a hybrid athlete, CrossFit athlete, power lifter. You've done most of it, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mr. Universe and all those fun things.
Well, tell us a little bit. So what have you done? You did what is your powerlifting records too? Because I keep forgetting this.
Yeah, well, it was back my bench press powerlifting record. The last time I broke it, that was 40, and that was the open bench press class. So that stood still for 12 years. It was 205 kilos, but I did that without a shirt on, a press shirt on. Where everybody else to even break that, they had to do it with those shirts on. But powerlifting was always just something, a means to an end, because I used to use powerlifting to really stimulate my nervous system so I could deal with lots of high order stress and demand, but I always lifted in a very composed manner, as people who competed against me used to become aware of. But it was that whole thing, once you got the nervous system at that level, then I could use that to do what I needed to do for bodybuilding. So in terms of higher levels of stress demand, intensity factors of training over time, being able to tolerate, I shouldn't say tolerate because I did it always relatively easy, the eating programs that I used to use for that. I never wore it on my sleeve. I used to go on these competitions, and even though I was living in Mackay at the time, so a very conservative type of place, I'd never walked around without a shirt on, those type of things. People would have been a little bit freaked out by that back in those days. But I managed to win Mr. Universe living from Mackay at the end of the day. And then people would say to me, but you couldn't possibly be doing what you talk about now back in those days, but it actually was.
Yeah.
And as the program, when you first came to Star Bodies there, that program that you first learned from, that's still exactly the same thing that we used to do.
I was 12,
Yep.
Just for perspective. So I met Ken when I was 12. I popped into his local gym because Ken was on TV doing this bicep thing for the old APG glass or something, I think. My dad was like the Australian wrestling champ in his heyday. And he'd talk about aesthetics, not being functional. But here we are talking about someone that was Mr. Universe bodybuilding around the same time you were doing the powerlifting?
Yeah, powerlifting would always pre-exist the bodybuilding efforts. So I'd do that, and then as soon as I'd finish the bodybuilding, I'd go back and do some more powerlifting. And consequently, I was always much lighter as a powerlifter because I wasn't doing the volume work. So for me, to have the muscle size I had, that was all about volume training. Lots of short, intense workouts, a lot of work done in a very small period of time. So we're aware that a sprinter's legs are always going to be bigger than a little distance runner's legs, so because they've got to do a lot of work in a short period of time. But it's how much work is beneficial and how much isn't. That's the key component here. So we have this hormesis type of curve where we think about anything. Hormesis has often been used in medical senses, where what is the ideal dose of a toxic substance that we can give to a person who's got some condition that's going to boost their immune system. But if we give them too much, they're going to die. So we need to learn what that is. So anything coming up on this side of the curve is beneficial. Anything going down the other side is not beneficial. And once you start that trajectory, you're probably going to keep firing down until you go below your baseline measurement metabolic rate. And you're going to stick there for a period of time until your system forgives you for that effort, then come back up. So people misunderstand the ability to be able to perform longer with some level of fitness. And fitness is the organism's ability to adapt to the stresses that they find itself in the environment. But then we can often call this maladaptive responses to it, where their metabolism is slowing down more and more.
Yep.
I needed to spike my metabolism, which is the other reason why I do a lot of sprint training instead of other things, spike my metabolism and leave up here. So it takes a long time for my system to return back to this baseline metabolic state, but it never will because I'm spiking it again and again in the meantime. But that ideal zone there, I learned many, many years ago that that's about 20 to 30 minutes of moderate to intense effort to do it. You can go and do all sorts of cortisol testing on people and all that sort of thing. You're going to find that their cortisol levels are going to keep increasing more and more the longer they stay at. We need cortisol to help form memory and adaptions and those sort of things, but too much, no good. Not enough, no good.
Yeah.
So what is that ideal state? So I was drawing that out many, many years ago, and it wasn't until later on that I realised that there was an actual model that had been used historically to describe all this. So that was the way that I thought about it and deeply within myself, and I was just applying that to other people when they came to the centre. So they were following the same rules and principles that I was. I always knew that posture was very paramount to how we perceive and respond to our environment, so that was the rule. So nobody that I'm ever teaching today is doing anything different than what I would apply to myself to get a result. And the point that you made before about how things that you've learned from myself or you learned within yourself and how you apply it to your everyday life, everything we do has got to have that transferability. It doesn't matter whether you're a high performance athlete, how is this going to transfer into my survival in my real world? And not be disassociated from a real world, because that gap can be bloody difficult to fill.
See, this is the trend. So we've been doing a series of podcasts for the Phyba Performance podcast. We're talking to people about breathing, talking to people about dietary changes, a lot of exercise sort of stuff as well. We went through this era with the cold baths and all these bits and pieces. And even in regards to psychology and trauma counselling or trauma rehabilitation, the pattern that I'm seeing is, in order to induce adaptation, we need to create some sort of stress.
Stress, yes.
Okay, so we need to create a stress response where our body must adapt to that stress. And then what we need to do is create a positive adaptation, preferably. So you're either going to adapt to your stress negatively or positively. Now, what I've noticed as a pattern, when I talk to the psychologist dudes, they're talking about just screwing around with emotion attached to the memory. When we're talking to the breathing guys, they're talking about oxygen deprivation, but staying calm through that, maintaining a calm posture, so basically what I'm trying to say is, a lot of these things that trigger positive adaptation combine two major things. A challenge or a stress combined with a relaxed, non-stressed physiological response. So basically trying to build resilience by stressing yourself out without getting stressed. So for example, jumping in an ice bath. If you get into an ice bath which stresses your body out, triggers a survival response. Now, if you're there grinding your teeth, if you're there with your traps up, you're there shaking, you're there in the tense, you're there frowning, and you're like for your couple of minutes, you're going to get a negative adaptation to that stress. If you are capable of quoting Wim Hof's method, then you should be able to do the Wim Hof method, which is that calm breathing, it's the no frowning, it's the traps down, it's a good posture while you're sitting in the ice bath where your body will trigger an adaptation. If you're doing these breathing techniques, the Takeo breathing method, or whichever one it is that creates an oxygen deprivation that might trigger normally a panic response, if you can do that but remain calm and remain stress-free, again, looking at your posture, controlling the way your brain is thinking, then you can acquire a positive adaptation with mitochondrial sort of stuff. So the psychologists will often do the same thing. They're trying to talk to you through your trauma or get a memory, but then trying to screw around with the emotion attached to that memory, whether it's through changing posture again, or also changing your emotion attached to that memory. So every one of these things, it's almost like they're trying to reprogram the system by putting you into a stressful situation, but teaching you how to deal with it without angst, aggression, and a defensive posture. So with what I've noticed over the years, with the work that you do with people, you do put people into a very confronting, stressful situation in where they have to, if they assess themselves, but the whole goal of it is, from a very simplistic view, is to actually challenge yourself, stress yourself out, but maintain a safe posture, maintain a good posture so that your body will do a positive adaptation. a healing adaptation rather than a catabolic short-term survival response. So that's the biggest thing that I've learned from you, where when I'm in a stressful situation now that would normally lead to me being defensive or aggressive or angsty, I can now learn these techniques that you've taught me to drop my traps, stop the frown. I start with my feet, actually. I push my heels into the ground. I've noticed as soon as I do that, my posture drops and my traps drop and that sort of stuff, and I feel different. So that's a big part of it, isn't it? So with athletes, they should be doing that, huh?
But there's still lots of variables in that. But so some people have that ability to look calm and composed, but underneath it, those feet are still going a million miles an hour.
Yeah.
And it's that the work that we do mainly is to find out what those feet are actually doing. So a person, like the athletes go on training, and they're able to perform all their repetitions and sets, and they're going okay, that composure-wise. But all the time, it's just they've learned to desensitise to information coming from their bodies a lot better than what other people can do. And it's that fact that they start ignoring information coming from their body. Whereas that whole ability to be able to appreciate the information coming from the body, but learn to package it into something that's going to be useful in the future. So when they come to us, if there's been a breakdown of any sort, and we start to, as I was explaining before, we look in this environment here, it's a very stable environment. We know lots about everything that's going on in this environment, but we don't know much about the system that walks into this environment, be it the athlete. So we need to find out, okay, so how is this athlete perceiving their environment? Because for us as a human being, perception is everything. How are we going to perceive our world is how we're going to be responding to it. So if we put them on any one of the particular machines, and we often use the PEC fly to do this, because this area here, these fibers are very intimately connected to the high order emotional processing and fear centers of the brain. So if something comes into the space I'm going to protect, the same stress comes towards my shoulder, I'll probably use that my shoulder to bump it away. So there's a very mild stimulus. They have all the controls, like there's nothing scary, they're in a safe support environment. But when you see them start to move that across their body slowly, that's when you'll start to see lots of these unjustified anxieties and fear start to emerge that they're not really aware of.
Yeah.
Because that is their perception. We don't perceive our world as separate sight, sound, touch or smell. It's a flow of information that gets integrated in the association cortexes. So all we're doing is tapping into one of those sensory pathways to learn about how this person's perceiving their environment. Now, whatever we see in that first trial, if you wish, that they go through it, and we can see that all taking place, that's attached to a whole heap of associative memories. Now, at a bigger scale, they can put on half the stack and punch it out and look nice and composed.
Yeah.
Slow it right down, you see a completely different
Or the eyes open, and that as well. As soon as you close your eyes, it's like...
Yeah, because we need to eliminate visual information, because the visual system dominates the association cortexes, that can be quite corrupted in terms of our eyes lying to us. And the eyes have a dedication to maintaining all our skills, good, bad or indifferent. So the elite tennis player, of course, I love tennis players, and for this particular reason, is that they can go out onto a court any day of the week or month or whatever. The wind can be doing anything on any particular day. They don't watch the ball as it goes up to know where to hit it. Their sensory system, their visual system is so acutely accurate to all that. So when they throw that ball up, you'll see them, and as they're coming through in slow motion, you'll see their hands will make an online correction to correct that ball to get it where it needs to be. So very highly attuned. But if a person's walking around with their posture like this, their depth perception, every single thing that relates to that, how the athlete's been training, if they're starting to drop their shoulders when they're doing their runs or whatever, or getting into a state where they become very foveal focused and they're not taking too much notice about the peripheral information coming in, then their visual system just adapts and is designed then to maintain that skill. So we have to take the visual system out to destabilise all those programs that are in there, and then so that when they open their eyes again, they are to open their eyes slowly as if it's the first time they've seen the world, so that then that starts to become integrated to what they've already started to achieve. But it's the detraining of those unjustified fears and anxiety responses to it. We see people spontaneously cry. We've seen NRL player faint within the first couple of moments because all of a sudden he gave himself permission to relax, and as soon as that happened, we started to see the sweats coming and cold sweats happening, and then all of a sudden, boom, lights out. Now, that person can perform at a really high level, but just things were going wrong, emotionally things were going wrong, and all for probably justified reasons. So we can see that even though people can do things like be in the ice baths and do all that sort of thing and demonstrate a level of composure, you've got to look at, okay, what are they ignoring here as opposed to what are they appreciating about the experience there? and then be able to say, oh, this feels good, and
right.
modulate that into something that's going to be useful, because it's going to be useful. So whether it's a cold, stressed thing through that part of sensory, we're using heat or cold, oxygen deprivation, or whatever the case may be, it's that ability to be able to appreciate what's happening, to fully acknowledge what's happening, and package it into something that you've got absolute authority over. And be aware of the sensory stimulation, if you have awareness of it.
Yeah.
And then just package that into something.
And letting your body know that you're doing this intentionally.
Intentionally, yeah.
Like your intent is to actually challenge myself for the purpose of improving.
Yes.
As opposed to, man, I'm struggling now, I don't know if I'll survive the day.
Yeah.
Let's put all of our resources into survival. So there's a big difference between survival and thrival.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that I just made up that word, thrival.
Thrival.
But it works, I think. So what I'm thinking is, there's a lot of patterns that I'm noticing. You see people like Usain Bolt and that sort of stuff in slow motion. He looks like jelly.
Yeah.
Also, I see them before the race. They're smiling and laughing and they're chilling. They're not amping themselves up.
Well,
they're not firing up.
Well, they can't, because they need to be so in the zone. You watch them calming themselves right down. They need to be so in the zone that when that start signal goes, they've got to respond to that in about 15 to 16 milliseconds.
Yep.
The startle time of the average person is about 50 to 80 milliseconds.
Yeah.
And you see that getting worse and worse. You only got to pull up at lights where the green arrows going around, and you see how long it takes people to react to that green arrow. Why doesn't everybody just move?
Yeah. Oh, they're on the phone. No, yeah.
But it's just like, oh my God, they wait till this calm and then they start to react, and so, my God, it should. But that reaction time is getting lessened because people are just stressed. By the time they take in that data and make sense of it, so many things have already transpired.
Because, I mean, we can only take in so much data.
At once, that's right. And that's the whole point with our phones and mobile phones, all that sort of things, where that's giving this visual system more dominance over everything.
Oh, and by the way, that's my trick with that imagination creates your reality. Mm-hmm. You know that line when people say that, your imagination creates your reality? My perspective of that is we can only take so much data in at any one time. So I can choose which data I take in.
Yeah.
So if I, for example, if there's 2 million bits of data and I choose to take in 10, I'm going to select the 10 that's going to make me feel happy and good. So I'm not going to go and look at those other things, you know?
No, that's right. They're the most self-serving to us, you know, and that's the whole point. We've evolved exactly like that, but we're just missing lots of information. But the more stressed a person becomes, the less information they take. So too many bits of information go missing, and that's why when they're doing the pec fly, that exercise, you'll see the iterations occur. So we see the redundancy that's in their system.
So you mean like, so as we're going through, instead of being very smooth, it'll just be like, that'll go, this will catch up.
There's a point-to-point distribution taking place, but we see the randomisation, how things become random. And that's relative to how they're taking in all bits of information from there. So all of a sudden, and you can't make any prediction as to what's going to happen next within the system, so it becomes very unpredictable. Okay, now, whatever we see is always relative to whatever's going on in their system, the good, bad, or indifferent. So that's good. Okay, now if we correct this and we spend our time going through here, oops, there's the fear, there's the answer. Okay, stop it there, calm it down, get a sense of flow, distribution through your system. Being that gravity is this rule, goes this way, and motion goes that way. So there's math involved in how our systems get structured there. We have 4 points of distribution, our hands and our feet. We're focusing on putting ourselves in that grid, and we're just working through that nice and steady. If anything jumps outside of that grid, pull it back in the middle. So you're developing a centered experience of what's taking place. We don't need to be positive. We don't need to be negative. We need to be centered. That's our ultimate goal, is to be that, create that centered experience, and to be able to maintain a level of hierarchy. So when people talk to me about the mind, my attitude has always been that the mind is just a crude backup system, that if we don't engage at an executive level, we are most likely going to be influenced or driven by what, for that matter, what comes into mind. So it's just the brain doing its job.
So there's no boss?
No. There is the boss, like the hierarchical system there, that's our, our prefrontal lobes, all that sort of thing. So those neurons have very strong axons. They can tell things to shut up really quickly, right? If they need to. So I've often used the metaphor that if you're a cardiologist, at a party and had a few too many drinks, and somebody comes up to you and, Matt, we need you at the hospital. There's been an emergency. There's been an accident. There's a 2-year-old that needs emergency operation, and people will say, "By golly, I sobered up in a hurry."
Yeah.
Well, we know that's a real thing. So how do they now suddenly override the effects of alcohol to get themselves coherent to go and do something that's very, very important? So that is that area of the brain doing its job. So it can really control a lot of things. So it's impulse control, all that type of thing. But the anterior cingulate in particular, that is the observer in it. So when people say to me, I'm feeling anxious or this is taking place. And if I said, well, how do you know that? And, oh, what do you mean, how do I know? And it's not as if I'm having a go at them. I said, no, you must be an observer or you wouldn't know you're anxious.
Yeah, right.
So it is an anterior cingulate. So if you put your finger in the middle of your head there, but just a couple of inches below that, a little bit below, that's the anterior cingulate. That is the observer, so it's there for error detection. So if I went to say something to you and, oh, sorry, Matt, that's not correct. It was where was the little guy sitting that knew that what I just said was wrong, to make that correction.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very important. And that's the areas that we need to be connected to. So we observe, oops, there's a stress coming along there. Okay, stop it. It's an error.
Yeah.
When we see that emerge in here, that's a sensory perception error that's related to past associative experiences. Do we need to know what those experiences are? Not at all. We just need to correct the effect that those experiences have had on the individual.
Because that's something I noticed actually when I'm doing the treatment with you. Like Ken will be saying things like every millimetre matters, every blank piece of paper, just go and assess everything. And like I remember back, like the amount of stuff you can think about in a 10-second rep is ridiculous. Like if you, for perspective, the amount of stuff I can think about in a backswing of a golf and how quickly that is happening, or like playing cricket, by the time the ball comes, the amount of stuff as you're doing it, just lifting the bat up, the stuff that runs through your mind so quickly that can influence actually how you're performing. And they're the sort of things that are popping up as you're doing a 10-second rep with no weight. And then I'll go to Ken and say, oh, like I just had this vision or a memory of this thing. You go, yeah, whatever, don't make it famous. And it's like, he doesn't actually give a shit about what the trigger was. It's actually more how your body manifests and with that trigger, because, and that's not just taking the piss there, but that's a common theme I've seen with all the other psychologists and trauma and everything as well. It's the actual event isn't as important as actually the pattern that you're stuck in and just breaking that cycle, because once you break the cycle, the emotion attached to that memory and that just changes anyway. So it's not a matter of counselling as such and talking about it. It's a matter of calibrating you as awesome with it.
And you can't.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But you can't. Exactly. You're calibrating that, putting things into a better perspective for yourself. But you can't erase memory at all. Like but the old goal is to stop those memories affecting how you behave. So, retrospective psychology. I've got to be sensitive to things here because it doesn't have a very good record of taking people back into a place. We've seen there some pretty nasty outcomes from that, because when those events actually happen, a person to say, I'm like this, Ken is like this because this happened when he was young. That's linear psychology. Very linear, where I can point out lots of famous people who've done amazing things for the human race, they had horrendous childhoods and so forth. So it's not true to say that. But when you go back and you start looking at events like that through the adult lens, where in that between from there to there you've developed a whole heap of prejudices and biases and all sorts of attitudes about life, and then you look at that and you start to become critical about that point, that's a different story altogether. But this is where we've got to be super, super careful, right? What you've achieved in your life, every single thing you've achieved in your life, you're good, you're bad, you're indifferent, your relationships with people, the sport that you play, how good you got at things, it's all sensitively dependent upon initial conditions within our system. You pull that plug out, you don't quite know what's going to happen with the rest of it now. So it's like a whole heap of fiddlesticks all lined up in there. So it's all one big communication network, and you don't mess with that. All you're doing is moving things around. We're starting to say, I have this idea, for whatever reason the idea comes to mind, that this is something that I sort of basically recall taking place when I was young, has having some effect on me now. Things like that can emerge over life because your body is constantly trying to refine itself, because, okay, right now, I'm nearly 66, and so I still feel like I've got a lot of years to go. So every now and then my body needs to sort of get into some type of state of resolution of different things, and different things might come to mind. All it's doing is just cleaning house so we can get you through and develop better strategies so that can actually help get you through the next 10 to 15 years. This is what people refer to as midlife crisis a lot of times. But so we've got to be very careful of how we pull things out from down below, because that's definitely going to affect the function of things. So all of a sudden, I seem to have resolved that matter, that thing that took place when I was young, but now I don't feel the same way about my partner anymore. And my relationships, my job, all these other types of things, because everything is dependent on it. So it's one big communication network. So it's like a massive grid of communication. If you put electrical charge into that grid, it's going to affect the whole thing.
See, with the naturopathic training, they always talk about like we kind of acquire. So we're born with certain innate stress responses, which are just generic sort of responses whenever we get a trigger. You know, do a little bit with the immune system, do a little bit with the liver in case it's poison, do a little bit here, stop it spreading. You know, just a generic sort of response. Then we acquire defense mechanisms based on our experiences as well. And this is where I talk to a lot of people and they'll say, oh, I've never been the same since, you know, and that sort of stuff. So they'll say, oh, this trauma happened, or this injury happened, or this event happened, and I survived it, but ever since I'm kind of stuck in this survival pattern. So what often happens from the naturopathic perspective is that your body survived that response, so it gives itself a little pat on the back and goes, well, let's just add this acquired stress response to our innate stress response, and then whenever we get a stress trigger, we won't wait to see what that trigger is this time. We're not going to wait to see if it's immune, infection, allergy, toxic exposure, environmental, pain, trigger, trauma. It says we have a defense mechanisms that's worked before, let's just do that again. So what I noticed is there's some people out there that are running through this regular physiology, this constant pattern that they get stuck in, and they can't understand why. And the point is the trigger, it's been and gone. It's actually the acquired lessons that are stuck. And so one of the most fascinating things with the work that you're doing in regards to the calibration stuff is that, from my perspective again, I see that it helps people where you are who you are through your experiences, everything you've been through. We can't go back and change that. We can't necessarily take that away and that sort of stuff. But here you are now. You're still here. You've got opportunity to grow. You've got always the ability to adapt, heal, and all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of the work you're doing is almost calibrating fresh as often as necessary to say, hey, this is me on a rock, spinning around, another big rock, and all that sort of stuff, like all that sort of stuff happening. And here I am, I'm capable of sitting here right now. Now, if I was under attack right now, if I was being poisoned, if I was flinging off the earth because gravity's gone, if any of those sort of things were happening right now, there's no way I would be able to close my eyes, drop my traps, and stop and do a 10-second rep. Like, it's almost like screwing with your brain to say, like, seriously, that can't possibly be happening right now. So, like, if you might have a memory or a trauma or something running through your mind, a trigger might happen. But the fact that you're doing this, the brain goes, there's no way this dude's being attacked by a lion right now. There's no way, because if he was, he'd be like doing like panicky things, you know? So is that part of the therapy?
And that's part of the main thing is perception, which we're always perceiving our environment, action, when we need to be acting on the environment in some prescribed manner, and then cognitively manipulating the outcome. So unless those three are all lined up at the same time, so there needs to be an applied stressor coming in at a certain speed that can form those adaptations. So that's what we call a metabotropic neurotransmission, and we learn from that, as opposed to fast, but that's inotropic. So it's just a transient experience. It doesn't really have any value. So it's like some random conversation I had with a stranger at a nightclub. You don't retain that information. So things need to come in slow and steady, and then all of a sudden a bit of anxiety might, or a memory might emerge about something. Okay, stop it there, calm it down. So anything we experience involves neurons firing in a certain sequence to create that experience. If we're not happy with that, or we believe that that's influencing our behaviour in some way, in a negative way, then we need to correct that. And as soon as we take control of that at that executive level and start overriding what's going on, get rid of the middle guy, that mind stuff, so we need to go executive straight to the mainframe. So in reality, as time goes on, nothing really should come to mind unless you put it there. Or if something does come to mind, it's something of total relevance. Oh, geez, I forgot to do such and such. Where it's clean space, because you're getting rid of all that clutter. And I've said oftentimes, so if we set up a whole heap of obstacles for a person, when there's fires and nasty things here, there, and everywhere, and we said to them, so do you believe you can walk through here and not hurt yourself? And they have a look and go, oh yeah, I reckon I can give that a go. And they get to the other side and say, that's it, I did it. So, well, how did you do that? Well, I just avoided those things. Yeah. Really simple. And did you pretend they weren't there? No, of course I acknowledged they were there. I just avoided them. That's navigating physical space. If we want to navigate emotional space, it's the same thing. Why would you go and touch that thought if you know it has a history of hurting you? Yeah. But we have these wonderful laws of energy conservation to deal with. So the laws of energy conservation says energy must be conserved. It's easier for us to maintain existing patterns of behaviour than adopt new ones. So the system's going to constantly. So when you're doing something and there's these people yelling, there's things yelling at you from the sideline, it's saying, no, Matt, no, we need to stay the same. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Try and maintain this consistency. Your system couldn't give a damn, good, bad, and different. It's designed to maintain our patterns of behaviour, and that's our reality.
Yeah.
So it's only when we recognise at another level, no, this is no good for me, this is not going to get me to where I need to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, then we've got to set about taking that control. And that's going to take a lot of conscious effort for a period of time until these new...
Is that why training works so well? Like, you know, with training, like with muscle memory and stuff like that, like just repeating these patterns over and over again, making them more efficient, but also building into that muscle memory. So when you are exhausted and when you're tired or when you're stressed, like just these default pathways kick in that are actually like efficient.
Yeah, it's all about the maintenance. Everything is about the brain. It's all the imagery that's up in the brain. Like you can sort of say, you know, we talk about muscle memory, sort of say, well, hypothetically, if you took the head off a person who's never trained in their life and stuck it on this person who's done lots of training and all that type of thing, the muscle memory wouldn't be there to go and do X, Y, Z. It depends on that brain to organise it. So
I used to do a lot of work with fighters and that, and I noticed there was a couple of fighters that only ever won if they were like knocked out in the first round and like did the whole fight like pretty well. I can't even remember the fight. A lot of football players and that too, they used to perform better when they were totally dissociated and knocked out, just running back on muscle memory and not thinking too much. You know?
That's when they are totally into that survival mode, you know.
Yeah.
So, because the muscle memory, like I said, that can be a lot of traumatic experiences with the way the person's been training in the past, you know. So it's trying to override those past experiences with that to be able to get a better growth factor. So it's like my shoulder that I had the complete shoulder reconstruction, replacement, not a reconstruction, replacement, done 7 weeks ago. And, so when we talk about memory and influence, I should not be able to do anything like this at the moment.
No.
I shouldn't be able to do it. I'm back training, I'm doing nice, good control movements and so forth. But that's because all the programs that I put into place before I had the operation, before I had the procedure, which took 4 hours instead of 90 minutes because the surgeon had to do a wonderful job of peeling everything back and putting it right back in the right place. So, fantastic surgeon. When all that, by the time I come out, for starters, I had no pain, which was just, blowing people away that there was no pain at all. Just things were sore where clavicles were cut and so on. But it was because I got myself in really good shape before I went in there. I was doing lots of unilateral, which is something that's not common to what I do. So it's like, the hemispheres of the brain were being very uniformly stimulated in that sense. So left, right, same thing I was doing with all my leg movements, exactly the same whenever I could. So by the time all this interference, like this little bit of perturbation to my system, so to speak, the system had all this knowledge, pre-existing knowledge, to set about very rapidly trying to restore this landscape that I'd already built there before. So I could come down within the next day after the operation. I came back down into the clinic, and even though I had my arm in the sling, to look at me, I was doing one-arm push-ups off that Smith machine there, and to look at how balanced I was with my feet, and you'd swear that other arm was holding on to it.
Yeah, wow.
So, and I was just thinking, as I was doing the other movements, left arm, right arm, still kept repeating those patterns. And literally I could go back upstairs and just lie there and you just feel all this, even though it's all brain activity, just feel all this stuff happening, and my arms starting to twitch and doing really nice things. And it didn't, everything just came back online so fast.
Because the body's more like, it works more like a flock of birds sort of thing, where things react around to the cells nearby, as opposed to there's no boss in a flock of birds. They just seem to know
there's no
to move
government.
together.
So no central government. They're all, and that's the thing we talk about it as, and we are exactly the same. We're a deterministic, chaotic system, which is a contradiction in terms. That system, the flocks of birds, is deterministic because we know what the rules are. So each bird is just communicating with its nearest neighbours, those nearest neighbours with their nearest neighbours, but collectively they do this incredible thing. All right, so the interesting thing about that phenomena is that each bird, like as we're sitting here now, we all have our own individual things. The birds, they're grooming themselves, having sex, eating, all that type of thing. The predator comes along and they transition into this other state, and where they just move from being an individual to being part of that whole flock. And that's to preserve any one bird from getting taken by the predator. If the predator comes into the flock, you'll see the flock split apart, and it comes back together again because it's a robust system. So we say that system is very impervious to perturbation. So there's a few words.
Yeah.
So we need to have the same thing for us. We need to be able to take a perturbation from our environment, physically or emotionally, take a hit like that, and get back on track really quickly.
Yep.
So now that's, you might call that resilience, but it's just that whole adaptability, that ability to be able.
But you also don't want to be stuck there.
Don't want to be
So
stuck.
you want to be floating around like
Floating
a
around,
psycho the whole
No,
time.
so
you need that time to recover.
You can't see where people get stuck in these patterns of behaviour that become so rigid. It's detectable in their system. It's detectable in the background tone they exhibit in their legs. You know, you ask them to do a basic movement that we do, a fundamental movement as a child. We sit there and we flop our legs back and we don't even think about it. And you ask them to do it, and all of a sudden they can't facilitate something as simple like that with a command to the base. And so now this is important because they're walking around on these legs. So every time they put their left foot on the ground, that's telling a different story to the brain to when they put their right foot on the ground. Because of that, the body needs to protect itself, so then it goes into this more concentrated hyper state of vigilance. And that's where anxiety is. So the system, information can come in, but it can't escape. So a really nice dissipative system, which we call a softly assembled system, would be, you know, like Mark Matthews on surfing those big waves where you've got to have that fluency with it, or kids doing parkour where they're running through all those landscapes and they're completely random, they can't make it, they just got to spontaneously respond to that. So that's a nicely softly assembled system. And so we have to start developing that philosophy. I want to be like that. And so that becomes your mantra. And so when we're doing our movements, softening things up so we can get an appreciation.
But with a certain amount of tension as well. So that, again, that sweet spot.
Just the right amount of tension there. So when people said to me, you couldn't have possibly deadlifted 300 kilos and not, tensed up, I said, but it was the right amount of tension.
Yeah, but even if you consider a sprinter, for example. So, I mean, just anything we do functionally, you're going to have some muscles flexing and some extending. There's an on and an off switch occurring at exactly the same time. In order for you to be able to do this, some muscles have to let go while the other ones fire.
The whole process of excitation and inhibition, which is really important. So, to give an example of that, how it's a joint venture, is that if you ask a person to stand on one leg and lift the other leg up, and then they might see that the leg they're holding up keeps wanting to go on the ground, so they often blame the leg that they're standing on as the problem. Where that might not be the problem. It can be the leg they're holding up is not doing its job of inhibition properly. So the ability to inhibit and excite at the same time. So it's like the hemispheres. So that's a joint venture between both hemispheres. Like one hemisphere says to the other one, "Is it okay if I do this?" And the other one's going to say, "Yeah, that's fine. Well, you better do this if I'm going to do this." So it's a joint venture.
Because that's what those legs that you're talking about before. Like trying to get your legs to be floppy like a kid and that sort of stuff. And then eventually you go, this is quite easy actually, like a floppy kid. And then Ken will go, "Okay, keep your left one still," while your right one goes. Then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh my God, now everything's floppy. I can't be still now." It's like this constant, man. And to be that finely tuned that you're capable of doing all these things is just a sweet spot.
And it's not just people keep interpreting those as physical experience. They're not. It's all connected to our emotion. You cannot ever separate the emotional thing, the psychophysical. You can't ever separate emotion from the physical thing, because it all goes back to, at that point in time, I'm taking in all this information from the environment. It's all getting integrated, but in amongst that, I'm trying to have a thought of doing something, and there's that much noise in there. I can't even do that properly.
Do you know what's crazy too? Because it's almost like it all links at once as well. So, for example, I can study to learn a new fact or a new spiel, or I could memorize a speech or something, And the way that occurs in my brain is the things that I use regularly. It provides a shortcut. So I'll basically create a neural network that'll allow me to access that information. Everything I've ever seen, heard, read, whatever, is in there somewhere. I practice how to access that information. I then get a shortcut through a neural network to that piece of information. So someone asks me that question, bang, it fires quite quickly. I know where to find it. The body can do the same thing. So this is what you're talking about with rehab and like these creating new neural networks. It's the process of practicing and training and finding a way to access that thing, and the body will build new neural networks.
so much-
Like, it's easy to
yeah.
understand in our brain,
Yeah.
but what you do with rehab and getting people out of wheelchairs and bits and pieces, it's a similar thing through the body, huh?
It's a similar thing, but it's really, but it's always treat the person, not the disorder as well. So it doesn't matter that it's a spinal cord injury. They're an individual person before they had that injury, so they
Yeah.
could have all these other stress and anxieties and that are creating noise within their system that's going to interfere with the lines of communication. So we've got to get rid of all that noise and all that interfering stuff. So it's always treating people like that. We just we don't make the lesion famous as well, the same kind of thing, because we've
Yeah.
seen too many people just do amazing things with these lesions that they were told that they're never ever going to walk again. You're complete,
Yeah.
you're complete, mate. Sorry, this is your life. It's in
Yeah,
this chair.
and I've seen the opposite too, where people have got rid of the lesions, but they still can't walk.
Because they can't walk. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and there's more and more of that happening too, where people are just developing these disorders that and are coming to us for treatment, and we're able to help them correct that within a very small time scale. So the question was, well, where was the disorder?
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't in the physical representation of the system, but it's that whole, that representation. Like, nothing is a physical. You can't experience any emotion without a physical sensation being attached to it. And likewise, you can't do anything physical unless there's emotion attached to it. So when that information comes in, all our sensory information, it goes through the emotional regions of the brain first, on its way to the cortex for subjective evaluation, back down through there again for the response. So first we perceive and then we respond. So if we're going to be concerned about a motor neuron disease, motor neurons are just like puppy dogs waiting for somebody to throw them a ball. They're responsive to the sensory system.
Yep.
So are we looking at a sensory systems issue here or a
Yeah.
motor systems issue here? I'd
Yeah.
argue a sensory system.
Because what's interesting about a lot of those motor neuron diseases as well is they get this peripheral spasticity, but they have central lesions.
Yeah.
It's like it's not even in the air. Like it's so confusing with that. How the body, because I had a conversation with an anatomy physiology lecturer for hours trying to work out what the hell a cramp is. Like, what's your perspective of a cramp? I still do not know. There are so many different triggers and treatments and versions of cramps. Like, what's your perspective?
Well, once again,
You'll simplify it, I know.
The emotional regions of the brain are definitely involved in that. We know that for starters. So an athlete could have, an NRL footballer, they could have trained 5 times harder than what they're actually playing in the game.
Yeah.
But now the grand finals, and so the cramping up occurs
Yeah.
because of the sense of
But
urgency.
then the pickle juice working on a central gag reflex
Yeah.
or something and stopping a cramp in their calf.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things
And
that mess
that's-
with my brain.
And that's only because now they put other information in that's going to get priority.
Yeah.
So the brain, when they become aware there's a bit of a cramp going on, that's when it gets positive feedback, and that's what will amplify that experience.
Yeah.
So it's that cramp because up in the brain, it's when the positive, positive, and
Yeah.
positive, negative. So there should be positive, negative repelling, doing this wonderful thing all the time. But when it gets attracted like that and gets stuck in a certain state, because too much is happening up in the brain.
Yeah.
There's just too much information going into a certain that's representative of that particular area. So that's when we need to decide. We need to be on a trampoline, like a little bouncy ball,
Yeah.
say, okay, let's just look at this person. It's got a restraint here, it's got a restraint there, a restraint there. This is what's so wonderful about these simple little things, like that little rebounded. You just hop on there and you just start to bounce. When
Yeah.
you're doing that, you're putting information into that system, you're getting some information back. Your system will naturally start to convert that information into something useful for itself, because the laws of energy conservation will predict that it's easier for you to do the right thing than the wrong thing. So initially it might be a little bit bunky and there's a few this way, but you just keep, you don't have to do airtime and everything, just nicely doing this, it'll just keep adapting to a higher state of complexity all the time. So that's another way of doing some simple calibration.
Yeah.
And being in mind, okay, just stay out of it, just let my body, just little bounce and that, and all these little restraints in there will just gradually start to be removed, because it's easier for the system to do the right thing than what is the wrong thing. So even when we're not on track at certain times and we're trying to get something right, you just have faith that if I'm standing on one leg with my eyes closed, for example, let's just say, I'm really wobbly at that because my visual system has been lying to me all this period of time, it's not properly calibrated. But eventually, if I just let it go, don't get into it, just let your body do it, it'll work it out. So if I get a pendulum swinging, that pendulum's going to keep losing energy until it finds its lowest energy point, which is at the bottom of the system it's nested within. If I just let my body go and don't try to overcorrect it, it'll go through all these conformational states until it finds its lowest energy point, which is when it's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Now, that's very profound, because when we look at what the initial responses were to the person, that's relative to all the things that are going on in their body, good, bad, indifferent, disease, disorder, despair, whatever we'd like to call it. if somehow they've done and they've created something like that where all of a sudden now they're doing something properly, well, now we've got evidence that neurons in that system are firing differently to what they were before. It's not new neurons or anything like that. It's just using the neurons that are there, the synapses there, smarter, and just controlling that way. So the disease disorder, that can't be there like it was before because we've changed some initial conditions quite simply. So everything, that whole understand the sensitivity to initial conditions. If the traffic coming back from the coast on the weekend, everyone's doing the right thing, thank goodness, and it's moving nice and smoothly. Then somebody starts putting their foot on the brake intermittently at the front of it. Now we've got a traffic jam 10 kilometres back here. So that's an example of sensitivity to initial conditions. Our systems are constantly like that. With neurophysics, we're trying to get as close to some sets of initial conditions as we can by calming the person, trying to ask the person to calm themselves down as much as they possibly can, what they believe to be calm. Engage with a stimulus, so that's they're acting upon the environment in some reliable manner that we can measure. And then objectively, as they're going through, if there's any unwarranted fears or anxiety start to emerge, is correct those errors, particular errors. Once they start to do that and say, straight away, their system is heading in the right direction. That's why people come to us with really complex conditions, and that's why within the 4-day time frame that we put that limit on it, we expect to see significant changes occur within a person's system. So that's always the case.
So I'm just thinking something new. Use that analogy of the highway again. A lot of athletes, not just athletes, not people. It's almost like when they're performing or exercising, training or thinking or whatever, it's like they slam on the accelerator and then slam on the brakes. So for example, we do everything with angst and intensity. Right? It's just like, bang, I'm going hard and now I'm stopping. It's like, but the reality of it is when you look at an anatomy physiology perspective and using things like mTOR, as a rehab, like a growth, and AMK as a burner, it's almost like the highways, what should be happening, instead of slamming on the accelerator going and then slamming on the brake before you run into something, what we should be doing is we push the accelerator and then we take our foot off the accelerator. Seamlessly. And when we take our foot off the accelerator, as opposed to slamming our foot on the brake, when we take our foot off the accelerator, we're going back into that regeneration repair. That's when we can replenish our creatine load. It's when we can replenish. So basically what I'm saying is you can be running that way and your cells can be recovering and regenerating at the same time as certain muscle cells are in that relaxed state while others are driving, as opposed to going all in and then slamming on the brakes. It's that sweet spot of maintaining that level of efficiency.
It is, and there's the point. Like that, what you're talking about there is seamless transitions from one state to the other, and that's the part that I coined that many years ago, because some of the exercise scientists were seeing back in those days that even when that person does something like a bicep curl, they EMG markers biceps and triceps, they'd see that as the transition from the concentric to the eccentric phase, there's parts there where nothing was happening. And then likewise coming from the eccentric to the concentric. So it's like now that's what we'd call anomalies in the system, and they would say, or a singularity it's actually called. But nothing in nature everything in nature is seamless. So all of a sudden we got this anomalies appearing in the human nervous system, and human beings are the only animals that exhibit this type of behaviour. Like, so lift something up in the day, where animals
they breathe in relation to how we lift, and
that's right. And so we often have to teach people how to deregulate their breathing pattern consistent with what they're doing to what they're doing. But it's this problem now that we've got these singularities. So when I was presenting this at a conference at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, I was looking at why does the elite athlete who's shot 1,000 basketball hoops before, this time they jump up in the air and they come down, their ACL blows. That's not an ACL issue, that's a systems issue. Everything is always a systems issue. Right? There's no privileged point of observation in the central nervous system whatsoever. It's one complete system. So we say, my hypothesis was that when they left the ground, the system came across one of these anomalies. There's these missing bits of information there, so the system didn't have all the information it needed, so that when they came back down and landed, there was a corrupt, basically it was corrupted from there. So you can't just fob that off and say, the athlete's torn the ACL. Why? That's what I've always been, okay, why? What could be possibly going on with this? So we have to teach people to do these seamless transitions, which is what you're referring to, where they're coming out, they're doing their movement, and rather than this acute sudden change of direction, you think of it more like an athlete running around an athletic track. The athlete's not doing anything different around the corner than what they are. They're staying in the zone. So they're making that transition where there's no extra effort. We're not having a bias between the stress coming in and the stress leaving, because we don't experience life as a sudden stress, then emotional withdrawal. Sudden stress, emotional withdrawal. If you embed that type of pattern into your system then has to use a lot of energy when you walk outside of the gym to start to normalise itself.
Yeah.
And then person is demonstrating a lack of control over something they should have control over. So how's that going to translate into relationship building, what they do in the traffic, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's fixing up these areas. So there's no bias between stress increasing in my body and stress decreasing. So you're maintaining the same biochemical hormonal responses to it, and you're trying to get rid of those differences. So we've done all the proper real world data. We've got the personal trainer, pulled them off the street, and we could see, okay, we do 5 repetitions with a 5 kilo dumbbell using your favourite arm at what you perceive to be a walk in the park pace. And of course, it was quite predictable that we'd seen these anomalies appear, these different where nothing was happening. We had a person who'd been doing neurophysics for a little while, and you're seeing that as it's moving along, so the bandwidth, the bandwidth of the personal trainer, I'll blow it up a bit, let's just say it was this high. The bandwidth of the person doing little neurophysics was like this high, but you could still see the lumps.
So what you're saying is that using something like a electrocardiogram, so using an electrical stimulus, you say instead of having, you wouldn't know if they're going up or down. Yeah. Like they go up intensity, down nothing.
That's right. So we had the EMG markers.
And you could be the same the whole way.
So we had the EMG marker in the bicep and tricep.
Yeah.
And so, but you could still see the peak phases. So even though you could still, there was a nice line, but you could still see that where it would clump up in certain areas. It was smooth. And so, well, that's 5 kilos. What would happen if it was 10 kilos? Well, obviously that would increase in density, which is still putting stress on the other fabric of the system. So then we got a person who's really good at it, and you couldn't tell where any of those repetitions were.
Right.
So that's how we need to be. So we can move through space and time, and our bodies just keep responding to the environment in a similar way. So the kangaroos that they had in captivity, years ago when they were looking for the famous fast twitch, muscle response, they had EMG markers on their legs, and they startled those kangaroos, and they expected to see these spikes.
Yeah.
And they were scratching their heads when they didn't see any of those spikes. And that's when I said, I know exactly what's happening here. And this is it, because they're seamless. They're just moving spontaneously, seamless.
It's interesting because James, I've been doing a lot of these CrossFit workshops with James, and a big part that he teaches people to improve, the first thing he does, if anyone wants to make a small improvement or like a 10% improvement to their thing, he talks about transitions. So it's all about just planning for your transitions, having the smooth transitions, and whether you're part as a team or as an individual athlete, it's actually strategizing your next moves, but not just allowing them to happen and getting ready for that movement rather than bang, 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 now jump over here. There's another thing I was going to ask, because as we're talking, we talk about that sweet spot with tension and relaxation that allows us to do these smooth transitions and seamless stuff. But so when someone's training and someone's doing these things regularly, they're getting better and better at it and that sort of stuff, and they're acquiring a certain amount of strength and tension and that. What do you think about stretching? Because if someone's done all this work to kind of get themselves in a position where they can do this exercise, like the sprinter that wants to just take off in those milliseconds, what happens if you stretch? Does it make it stretchier, less power, or I'm always curious about that.
Yeah, we just got to be aware. Like the word stretching always implies that it's going beyond its normal fabric, right?
Yeah.
What it's designed to do. So it's stretching something out beyond it, that existing fabric. So as opposed to normalisation of a limb, movement, that's a different story altogether.
So if you've got tension and something's really tight...
Yeah, you see it in the person's fascia, you get them on the ground. You should be able to pick a person's leg up to 90 degrees if they're lying on the ground and dorsiflex their calf without too much trauma. But
I almost cry when you do that to me.
You get people's legs up there at about the 45-degree angle, and they're just almost screaming with pain.
Yeah.
And this is how it shows, and this is relative to the question about stretching. So when we see that occurring, that's a conversion disorder straight away. Because that's anxiety that's causing that.
Because if you gave me anaesthetic, you could just do whatever.
No. Well, of course. But as soon as I stop doing that,
Yeah.
instantly the pain goes away.
Yeah.
Now, if that was real pain, it doesn't go away. Pain doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Like if you hit your finger with a hammer, it lingers on there, you know, for some time. So it's that instant stopping of that, where as soon as you let it go, so you can show. So long-term fear converts into anxiety, and long-term anxiety can convert into pain. So now when the person gets coached to appreciate that, and so they've gone from this often having this excruciating experience of pain to the point where they start giggling because it's hurting so much that it actually becomes funny. And if that was real pain, they wouldn't be laughing about it.
Yeah.
And you're going to tear something. You can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Because nothing's going to tear. Because
See, I fall asleep when pain gets really bad for me. Like either like a deep tissue massage or any of those things. Like when I go silly tattoos and things, I keep falling asleep because my brain goes, right, this is going to really hurt, and then I'd get into like a meditation. So I just actually fall asleep. So it can't be pain.
No,
because if that was a genuine pain...
Yeah, it is. I've always been fascinated by the whole topic of pain. I mean, because it is that subjective experience. You know, and, you know, like I said, for me to come out with no pain, and I said to Nikki, well, I'd probably argue that people who experience a lot of pain post their shoulder replacements, they probably weren't in a lot of pain pre-existing. It's, you know, where I had to sort of suck it up for 5.5 years because I was so busy doing what I was doing. And you've seen the photos of what my shoulder looked like beforehand, so it's pretty bad. But it's that whole subjective. But when it gets down to the stretching, so that is when I'm doing that to a person, I'm not stretching. That's just normalisation.
Yeah.
And we've got to come on, just relax till you get them through that point. So they've got to learn how to do that themselves. Then, you know, if somebody can get on the leg press and put your legs up on, bend yourself forward and pull your toe back to be able to get rid of that. But it's that tension that builds up in our bodies. But when it comes to stretching and you're going beyond the person's reasonable limit, that's a different story, because that's when information gets lost from the system.
Yeah, what about hot yoga and stuff like that? I mean, these people do these
Bikram
yogas
the origins of yoga was always about the flexibility of the mind, so to speak, and then the body would follow. Now they try to reverse engineer that, where they stretch the heck out of people, if that's the word you want to use. Yeah. And their whole idea, well, that's somehow going to liberate the mind, because what you've got to go through the mental gymnastics of it. But if you stretch a rubber band out, when you do that, the rubber band is losing information from the system. Yeah. When you let it go, it'll restore some information, but never the same amount as what it lost. But over time, it's going to lose its elasticity. Yeah. It's going to
becomes a shitty rubber band.
Shitty rubber band, yeah. So we're the same thing. Like all the relationships between our tendons and our ligaments, they store energies at different ratios to one another. Yeah. Okay, so now if you stretch them as one, the regathering of that need to take place at different timescales, and that's when all these errors start to occur. Yeah. In that, so we've got to be careful about that, and it's always, like get the science right, get the physics right first. Yeah. So a person does a whole heap of leg extensions, and they feel the lactate, which is just anxiety in the first place. They get up, they pull their leg up behind their bum, and the pain goes away. So they get this sense of relief. What they don't realise was at that point in time, we call the negative entry. We need to maintain a level of entropy in the system for it to form adaptations.
What does that mean?
Entropy is the measurement of disorder within the system. We need to maintain a level of disorder to make an adaptation. As soon as they do that, they lose that information.
Yeah, wow.
So we've done a whole heap of skills training. We've been a footy trainer. We've done and practiced all our skills, and then we sit down and we start doing a whole heap of stretching after. Chances are you lose a lot of the information that you just put into your system about the movements you were doing.
But what about also if you're altering to be symmetrical, to be most efficient? You might have some areas that are a little bit more tense, to maintain that symmetry.
So you've got to do other things to be able to recognise asymmetrical issues within the system that are very hemispheric type of issues. Left hemisphere doing something different to the right hemisphere. But kids don't stretch. They get out. Let's go and off they go and they just do it. So all of a sudden we get this idea that we've got to do lots of these type of things to warm up. What are we trying to warm up? And people who know me and they see.
What are we stretching too?
That's
this is the one that. Excuse me. Sorry, I interrupted you. These things just confuse me because for example, fascia, the connective tissue within the muscle bundle, makes up about 6 to 10% of the muscle bundle, but it generates over 30% of the muscle power.
Yeah.
And the theories behind that was based on the fact that that is actually the bit that's not going to be going soft. These are the ropes. This is the wire.
Yes.
Yeah, the steel wire that's running through that gives you your power.
Yes.
That's why you see a lot of these amazing power lifters or these really strong people seem to be just made up of ligaments, tendons and fascia. They don't necessarily need these massive muscle bundles to be able to lift heavy things. So when they're stretching and that sort of stuff, are we actually like stretching out the fascia and tendons and that to a certain degree? Are they going to lose some of that explosive power by stretching?
It's we're losing,
if overstretching.
Losing the information that we need to maintain that level of information to maintain our skills.
So how do we normalise then, as opposed to stretching? Do we then run through a series of the calibration exercise before? Would people be better off at running through a series of what we might call warm-up exercises or something to calibrate before an event?
Just sit down and think about what you're going to do for a bit. People who know me, they come down, and elite athletes have been with me. We go down to the footy fields, there's no warm-ups, there's no stretching, shoom, off.
Yeah, right.
To this day, that's what happens. That's what I do. Down the beach, there's nothing like that at all.
Yeah.
I've never torn hamstrings or anything like that, because you just realise it's that whole flexibility, that state of mind. As I mentioned before, give a person a general anaesthetic and move their arms and legs wherever they want to. But as soon as they restore their consciousness, their patterns of beliefs and fears and prejudices and bias come along, then that's exactly what takes place. So it's it restores a system to that existing state. So, we've got to sort of think past that, and we've got to think okay, I'm going to go down, I'm going to do some sprinting, and just relax, just let it get childlike.
Yeah.
Stop trying to be so adult.
Because when you play, you seem to be able to run for ages. Like you get tired, but you just seem to run. The only thing that stops you when you're a kid from running is giggling. Because you can't run and giggle at the same time. So and we get old because we stop playing rather than we stop playing because we've got old. So, and that is insane.
That there's going to be people who challenge that, but there's a lot of, a few years ago on New Scientists, where they announced the New Zealand All Blacks not stretching anymore, and a lot of the
because they change it all the time. Hey? Remember it used to stretch before, now it's stretch after.
Now they weren't stretching at all when they had that. But then there's a lot of universities have done the studies, and when they say 5-10 second stretches on a hamstring will reduce the efficiency of that hamstring by 12%.
Wow.
So now that's all good data, of course, but the reality of it is that when it comes down to the fundamental aspects, what's actually taking place is you're losing information from the system, information that you need to maintain.
Information that you trained into the system.
Yeah. And I never stretched when I was doing all the powerlifting, all that sort of thing. I never had injuries.
But what about warm-up? Do you do a little bit to get a bit of that lactate, hydrogen ions running through?
It's only just to feel to get myself head in the right place. I can't go straight into squatting, 300 kilos and all that type of thing, of course. Yeah. But it's just like getting that head in the right space. So firstly, I need to feel a level of stress from my environment, learn to metabolize that. But when it comes to, when we're talking about powerlifting, when it goes down to something basic like sprinting, I just should be able to go and do that straight up. No problem at all. And then it's really coming back to...
especially if you're getting attacked by a bloody lion.
Yeah. And you
wouldn't want to have to stop and say, hang on, let's stretch out. I'm not allowed to run until I stretch.
Yeah, imagine a primitive tribe getting invaded by another primitive tribe. Well, hold on a second, guys, we just got to do a few...
Yeah, wait for the whistle.
Warm-ups and stretching. So, it's become a fabrication of a lot of things, but there's been, coach footy teams, the first thing that happened was, that's it, the stretching's gone. And all those A-grade teams that I coached like that, those were the years where they got less injuries than anything. Yeah, so that was the first thing that went. I've never done it in my life.
What about these foam rollers and everything? You'll see these people again before any event. They're running through the stretches. They're hitting these foam rollers. Yeah. What about those sort of things?
It's an external stimulus, and it's what I refer to as object referral. Like they're referring how they're feeling by this type of apparatus. It's giving them some type of feedback to it, and they're trying to get rid of that feedback. But it's the reason all they're doing is dealing with some symptoms. They're not addressing the underlying causes to why that was there in the first place. Why would they need to be doing that? So there's an underlying cause to do that, and you've got to get rid of the underlying cause. That's more than anything, and so that Anticipation. Anticipation can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So I anticipate we're going to win this game today, and that can go a long way to producing that outcome.
Yeah.
But if I anticipate I'm going to hurt myself and I need to do all these sort of things, it's probably going to play out that something like that's going to happen. So you'll feel the slightest little twinge in your calf or whatever. That'll get blown up big time in the brain. And this is going to happen. So what I've seen more than anything, Matt, is that people have become so over-aware of their bodies in so many ways. They can name off bits and pieces of their body that I didn't even know existed. But it's that over-awareness of them, because we've got a lot of professional people out there whose jobs are dependent upon it in terms of the relationship they have in the club, in terms of getting people massaged and getting them on the field and everything. But it's that overuse where one particular NRL player said, we can't even kick a football unless we've done 20 minutes of stretching and warming up and that sort of thing. And
see, it's crazy, because I think back to me, because it's always about me. But there's every injury I had through most of my life was on my left side. And the funny thing is it all started with a twinge in my ankle that then they felt the need to strap. So then I did a twinge in my ankle one day. They strapped it on the game. The next week I turned up and said, we've got to strap your ankle because you had that twinge last week. We wrote it down. So we're going to strap your ankle. And then strapped my ankle, did my hamstring, did a knee, had the knee reconstruction, hamstring didn't do it. Then my left wrist, left shoulder, everything went. And it all started with this analysis of this left side where the ankle got strapped, I'd stretch in my ham, and then when I did my hamstring injuries, all this rehab on my left hamstring, you know what I mean? It was like, none of it was symmetrical, none of it was calibrating me back as me, okay, let's move forward. It was actually, every time I was doing these things, it was almost calibrating me as a person with a dodgy left side, because I spent all this focus. And then it's interesting when I come and do this session with you, put me on the adductor machine, smashing out these things, you take all the weight off, close my eyes, I can't even find my left leg. Put me on the hamstring machines, no worries. And then all of a sudden I realise I'm on a unilateral one, and one of my legs isn't even moving. I've spent this whole time doing everything with the other leg, the other one coming along as a passenger. Those sort of things, it's not even there. And then, or even to get it, then I'd even have to move my head or look at it, or like, without looking at it, you know what I mean? And so that's the sort of stuff that we acquire over our lives of just compensating or, that sort of stuff. And then we end up with all this dodgy injury. So it's never too late to go back and just go through and calibrate and bring things back into place.
To balance out, like always to think of the system as a whole. That whole, and the only issue is we're dealing with the human being. It is like dealing with two different people, because the left and right hemisphere basically have differing personalities to one another in that sense. So when you're talking about your left side, that's your right hemisphere. It's really it's the reactive one. It's the one that gets you running away from lines. The poor old left hemisphere's got to do the job of calming things down. But that's where the inconsistency. So with neurophysics, we'd be more focused on trying to get your left hemisphere to tell your right hemisphere what to do, but you need to be doing things both at the same time to do it. And you can see the deficit. Come on, stop it there. Just get it centered up. But when you strap something, you're not strapping the ankle, you're strapping the system. So if I had a spider web, you see a big beautiful spider web out in between two trees, that's a beautiful, what we're talking about, dissipative system. So that's got to be able to, the spider has to do all the math to work out what's going to happen when the wind is blowing on these things and on these trees and releasing energy, different time scales. So if I went and restrained that in some way and the wind blew on those trees, we know what's going to happen to that system, right? There's going to be some type of tearing. And then if the spider went down to fix that up, which it would do, and it patches it up, it's not going to look the same as what it did before. So it's got to create a structure that it can now blend in and dissipate through the rest of the system. So you imagine it would look different to the other. So it's never the same. But we have something's gone wrong in here. Your system, given the right type of conditions, you as the spider, the executive spider up there, and balancing down, it'll construct something that's necessary down here to fix this up, so it can then dissipate that through the rest of the system, like everything else is going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
So it's like that overall intelligence. You're looking constantly at the overall intent. It's not about a leg. This isn't about a shoulder. Every single cell in my body is aware of what's going on here.
Which there's no point overthinking it anyway.
No.
Which is why when you go into these academic presentations globally and you're publishing this stuff, there's a shitload of big words. But you break it down to a very simple form, is that we're just asking the body to do a thing, or like not even asking. The body just starts doing a thing, and it works out a way of doing it.
Yeah.
Another one I was going to ask you is, a lot of people ask me, they say, "Oh, this arm's weak. I've lost a lot of muscle here, so I'm going to do an extra couple of reps on this one." From my perspective, it doesn't make sense, because I mean, if you've got a strong arm and a weak arm, and you're both doing the same, this one will be easier. It won't be growing as much. This one will find it harder, and it will grow more. So that's again about calibrating.
I mean, you know, like typically, say I'm a right-handed person, but my left arm's always been stronger because I did my apprenticeship as a carpenter and all that thing. So you're shoveling sand. So you'll hold the weight of the shovel in this hand. You just use this hand to do the.
My left hand's an idiot.
Yeah, when I was doing.
I broke this hand once. I couldn't even brush my teeth. I had to like hold the toothbrush and shake my head at it.
Yeah, but it all goes back to that skill. Like then when I did a bit of plastering for, so you hold this walkie, the weights on there, and you just use this arm to do different things. So this has a higher skill set than the other arm, but you can't, you need doing those single arm movements like that. And when I was talking about what I was doing too, that was together.
Yeah.
Right? There wasn't just one arm at a time doing things. So if they're right thoughts, and you don't know how to dissipate that through your system. So if all of a sudden I've got a crook right knee, so I'm on the leg press, on the unilateral leg press, I'm doing right leg presses because I need to strengthen this knee. Now I've got my left hemisphere in a very highly excited state as a result of that. So then if I go over to the other one and do that leg, and I see there might be a difference. So now I've got my right hemisphere into a very highly excited state. Bearing in mind what I said before, they have different attitudes about what's going on in the world, those hemispheres. So now you don't ever want to start that pendulum swinging, because that's bipolar.
Yeah, right.
You get your left hemisphere in this highly excited state, and now it swings over to right hemisphere.
Yep.
You don't ever want to start.
This is why you always say you think central and that.
Center.
This is where you just stay in the middle, and the things will do their things.
And we're developing some point of center points of distribution. So you're looking at your hands and your feet. They're all points of distribution through your system. We're thinking about the machine supplies this beautiful grid that's very measurable. We can measure changes. So we're working through our grids nicely. Now that's just all to get your body organised and your system working like that. Then you can go and apply that. You can jump over things and do all sorts of things because your system's got all these stable reference points built into it. Most people walking the street don't have any stable reference points at all, so they become unpredictable.
A good one for that is that climbing machine or a unilateral leg press. Man, I've never freaked out so much. Put me on that climbing machine and it's like, sweet, I can stand here, I can balance these two pedals. And then it's like, I can even wiggle them a little bit like that. And then it's like, okay, so drop that one a little bit lower and that one. And it's just like, thump. I was gone. And I'm just like, from one extreme to the other. And then, but it was only when I go back central. So if I go central, I can hover around a central point, no problem. But when my brain went, drop your right down, left up, and left down, right up, it was just like, that's bad.
It is. I mean, and that was one of the things, like even like having this shoulder be it was because it upset the balance of my whole body. So I struggled with those things about standing on one leg and everything, because as soon as I got it done, unbelievable, the next morning, got up, and even though I still had this arm, but to be able to lift this leg up to put my jockets on, and I went, oh my God, that's unbelievable how I could do this. So it shows that part was affecting that. Now that was, just so people are aware, we said, well, how come neurophysics, why couldn't you fix it? You see the photos of it, that my humerus got slammed straight in.
It was rotten.
It was rotten, right?
Shouldn't sit there.
How the heck I could have even managed to do the things that I was doing was crazy. But
sometimes you need that surgery. I mean, if you've got a structural thing that's actually just pinched a thing and it can be relieved,
you can't
and allow you to calibrate again.
Physics can't fix that. I mean, that had to be completely taken out and something you put in there. But it's not the point. The point is my recovery. That's when my neurophysics therapy comes into play. How fast I can recover from that.
And in saying that, when I first came to see you, it was because I'd just been to some surgeons. They told me I needed a knee reconstruction. They wanted to do a shoulder reconstruction and a wrist reconstruction. So I thought, I'll come to Ken and I'll get a bit of balance going. And then I'll go back and recalibrate. Oh, no, never, you don't anything. I'll get to that in a sec. But I never ended up needing any of those surgeries because things just started working a little bit again. So Ken, we're running out of time, but I want to, just to summarise, I just kind of accidentally slipped into a segue into what I wanted to ask you next. And the segue is the leg way, we realise. No, so what we're looking at, I mentioned the word recalibrate and I see you twitch. And if I ever say reprogram, you do the same thing. So you don't like the do you?
No, we can't, because you can't anything. You can't use the RE words in biology because it always suggests a back transition.
Yeah.
You can't rewire the brain. You can only take the brain from a present state and enhance its qualities and functions. So it's an upgrade. So we talk about calibrate as opposed to recalibrating. We don't want to set back. People say, "Oh, I want to go back to running the way that I was."
Reboot the computer.
Yeah. I want to go back to running the way I was before. And so, well, you're never going to run the way that you were before, but perhaps you might run better than the way you were before, because you've got to forget history. Like, let's just get this started. Let's white sheet of paper. Let's just start again. Let's just put all the right programs into place, develop all these stable reference points within your system, so you go there, so your system is really robust now and can take on lots of stuff. No matter what you throw at that system, you're probably going to be able to deal with it really well.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Like, people coming today, it's like the bigger, stronger, faster world that we live in today. Everybody basically needs to adopt things like an elite athlete would. We need to develop stable reference points in the system to give us some guarantee as to what's going to happen when something significant comes along, because it's always the same. We're going to deal with it based on some historical events which you referred to before. We're very correct in doing that, because again, nature just has very simple rules as to why I would be stressed. Being invaded, or there's have a lack of food. Very simple reasons why it does that. It doesn't deal with our subjective reasoning for different things. It just puts it into one package. But it's that typical behaviour that you see. A woman one time in Sydney, you've seen her having coffee and then having a breakfast, and trying to have breakfast in the morning, legs crossed on her laptop, punching things out in this beautiful cafe setting. Lots of people, an awesome cafe there. Now, what her brain is learning about that, she's under a lot of stress and she's in this environment. Now, some other times she can go back to a coffee shop with her friends and start to feel anxious and not know why.
Oh, yeah.
Because it forms an association with those pathways to
and there's that innate defence mechanism. You survived it last time you were stressed in a coffee shop.
That's right. So
in the end, it's do it again.
You can't recalibrate her to a time before she went to the coffee shop and did that. You're going to take her system for where it is there now.
And say, hey, you're okay to sit in a coffee shop.
Upskill it. Upskill it, So,
for any other information from Ken, we'll put heaps of links and that sort of stuff in our thingy that we do. Hey, mate, someone will know how to do that. Get my people to speak to your people. But basically, search for everything Ken Ware NeuroPhysics. He's available to see directly, but also you can learn how to do these techniques yourself and become a neurophysics practitioner, or go and visit one of the guys that he's taught. This is scalable, reproducible. It's a system, and anyone can do it. If you've got the expertise and the experience.
Thanks, man. It is very important. We're taking bookings for 2024 now, so we're really looking for more practitioners coming out there, because I've done all the battles, I've fought all the wars, done all the science stuff. So the people coming into neurophysics, into the community now, they've got a clean run at the line. They don't have to do anything like that at all. Can I just go back one little bit?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the cold being in the ocean, so I have Lewis Pugh's book over there, right? So he's the guy that, the South African guy swimming those freezing cold waters in his jocks, So years ago, back at the Institute, John Carsberg came up to me one day, and I was just working with one of my patients from over, who's come from over New York, a spinal cord injured person. And they said, do you want to come up and meet Lewis Pugh? I'd seen all these people walk into the Institute before, all in suits and God knows what, and they went upstairs, and I thought it was just something he had organised himself to do. So, sure. So I goes upstairs, and at that point in time, I didn't know who Lewis Pugh was. I knew of this person that swam in this freezing cold waters and everything. So I went upstairs there. So it was the the Gold Coast Chamber of Commerce people there, and the Gold Coast City Council, who got Lewis out to do seminar, because that's what he's doing, motivational speaking. He's done all beautiful things around the world, environmental heritage and God knows what. So this person's walking towards me, putting out his hand to shake his hand, and I'm going, hey, the heck is this? Who are all these people? And they're all sitting there, what's going on here as well? So when he started talking, I said, no, very pleased to meet you. And I'm honoured at that point in time, I still didn't know who he was. We sit down across the table and he starts talking about his things. So he read John McLean's book. And he said, I was seeing something about John McLean. He said, I was really curious. He said, so I just wanted to come and meet you. So of all the places when he was on the Gold Coast Council, so what is something you want to do? I want to go and see this Ken Ware. So we go there, And so this is the story that he told me, right? So he was doing his swim because he wanted to know about this ability to control things better, this arousal. So he was doing his swim and kilometre or whatever, in the water, and he had this micro thought for 1 second, I'm almost there. And as soon as he thought that, his fingers nearly snap froze.
Huh.
Just that one tiny little lapse of concentration. Right? Now that guy back then, he pre-existed, the Wim Hof and that sort of thing. Now there was no studies done on him. He defies every single thing we know about thermodynamics, the whole box and dice. He's just this incredible, this human being that no studies were done on him.
Yeah.
And yet he was attached to Tim Noakes, the famous South African physiologist. He's attached to him, and there's no studies ever done on him. That guy. But the point was, he nearly lost, snap froze his fingers.
That's crazy.
So
change.
So there's a lesson there, and I mean, what could I offer that guy in terms of, I couldn't say
gloves.
I just, so he just wanted to talk because the belief was that, John had altered the way that he was, through his belief system, which was altering his belief system.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite see how I could transfer that onto what Lewis was already doing, these phenomenal feats. But the point was, in such a critical circumstances, that one little moment, and how many grand finals have been lost in the last 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Because the team had already thought they'd won.
Yeah. Well, what about the World Cup? How many times Argentina won it and lost it in that last game?
So it ain't over, it's never over until it's over, and that's the point.
Wow. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ken.
Pleasure.
We'll do it again for sure. You know it.
For sure.
Thanks for coming on.